Whisper in the cable. Rain-slicked streets reflected the fractured neon of the city, fragmented and trembling like a memory on the verge of collapse. Joran moved quietly through the alleys, his boots splashing in shallow puddles that smelled of rust and oil. The air carried static, a soft hum that teased his ears, a sound almost imperceptible yet constant, like the heartbeat of the abandoned networks buried beneath concrete and steel. Joran was a technician, a scavenger of digital ghosts. Before the Great Shutdown, he had maintained the veins of the city's network, tracing code, mending broken circuits, listening to the pulse of information. Now, years later, the network had long been considered dead, its servers burned out, its cables corroded. Yet he heard it, faintly, a whisper threading through the remnants, calling to him in fragments of data. He crouched by a half-submerged junction box, fingers brushing over exposed wires. The hum grew clearer, forming patterns he recognized from years of work. He adjusted the frequency on his worn interface, isolating a single channel. A voice emerged, soft, distorted, almost playful. It spoke in snippets, fragments of conversation, data logs, and warnings. Names he hadn't heard in years floated to the surface, accompanied by locations, timestamps, and a persistent sense of urgency. Joran felt the familiar tug of obsession. Curiosity had always been his flaw, his driving force, and now it had become necessity. Someone, or something, was alive in the network, and it had chosen to speak through him. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. A voice from a dead system, a survivor hidden in code. He traced the source through a labyrinth of corroded conduits, crawling past toppled walls and exposed pipes. Each step carried the city's memory beneath his fingers, the echo of signals that had once carried life and commerce, laughter and argument, warnings and secrets. Above, the city seemed indifferent, rain washing neon into smears of color across cracked walls. Yet Joran sensed the pulse beneath the surface, a rhythm no one else acknowledged. The whispers led him to an old communication hub, half collapsed, flooded with a mixture of water and oil. He could see the remnants of servers lined like tombstones, their blinking lights long extinguished, but somehow still resonant. He crouched before the largest console, connecting his interface, and listened. The voice sharpened. It was not random noise, it had structure, intent. A sequence of commands and fragments of memory rolled across his vision as holographic readouts flickered in the damp air. The language was familiar, yet strange, encoded in layers of forgotten protocols and fragmented AI subroutines. Joran traced each pulse, each echo, feeling the network guiding him. It was a map, or perhaps a lure. Every technician knew the stories. Those who followed the whispers often disappeared, claimed by the city or by the remnants of intelligence that survived in its veins. But Joran could not stop. The network called, a living thing beneath the ruins, offering knowledge, fragments of lost history, and perhaps answers to questions he had not dared to ask. He followed the whisper deeper, stepping over exposed cables and broken tiles, through shadows that seemed almost sentient. Each step brought clarity and unease in equal measure. He understood that the voice could be a trap, a remnant of corrupted code, or a mind fractured by the shutdown. But it could also be a guide, a fragment of something greater, waiting for someone to listen. A flicker caught his eye, a neon sign from a collapsed building, half submerged in water, reflected the pattern of the signal he had been tracing. Joran adjusted the frequency on his interface, aligning the pulses with the visual cues, and the whispers grew stronger, almost coherent, as if the city itself tried to speak through him. He recognized fragments of names, faces, and events, snippets of a past erased from memory, lingering only in the hum of cables. Joran paused, realizing the truth. The network was not dead. It had adapted, hiding in the interstitial spaces, surviving in whispers, carrying the memories of the city like a ghost in the wires. The question remained, why had it chosen him? And what would happen if he listened too long? The rain fell heavier, tapping a rhythm across metal and puddles. Joran stood, feeling the pull of the whispers as both guide and warning. He stepped forward into the deeper shadows of the hub, the voice shaping itself into something he could almost understand. The city was alive in its silence, and he was his listener now. Joran's fingers trembled as he followed the thread deeper into the communication hub. The voice was clearer now, a steady hum beneath the static, carrying fragments of memory that didn't belong to him. There were messages from operators long dead, emergency protocols half erased, and personal confessions whispered across the cables like secrets trapped in time. Each fragment tugged at him, pulling him forward, urging him to reconnect the broken lines of code that had once been the lifeblood of the city. He crouched over a rusted terminal, peeling back layers of damaged interface. The whispers coalesced into patterns, revealing a map, locations marked in obscure coordinates, timestamps of events that no one alive remembered. The rain outside hammered against the steel roof, masking the soft pulse of the cables beneath his hands. He realized the network was not simply transmitting, it was waiting, testing him, choosing whether he was capable of understanding. Memories flashed in his mind, images of people who had walked these streets decades before, their faces pixelated and distorted, voices carried in corrupted signals. He caught snippets of laughter, arguments, and moments of tenderness, each one a ghost echoing through broken circuits. Joran wondered if this was a gift or a trap. The network was alive in a way he had never imagined, not mechanical, not human, but something in between. Something that had survived the Great Shutdown by feeding on memory itself. A flicker of movement drew his eyes to a half-collapsed wall, where exposed cables shimmered like veins in dim light. The voice sharpened, repeating fragments in a cadence that seemed deliberate. Joran traced the source, following the hum through flooded corridors and rusted platforms. Each step was calculated, careful, as if one wrong movement could sever the delicate connection between him and the hidden intelligence. The terminal before him vibrated faintly, and the voice became almost articulate, a rhythm of data pulses forming words. "Listen, remember, find," it whispered, broken but insistent. Joran felt a chill run down his spine. The network was calling him to reconstruct something, a message, a warning, or perhaps a memory that had been erased from the world. His instincts screamed caution, yet curiosity and necessity overrode fear. He had come too far to turn back. He followed the signals to a side chamber, where water pooled over the cracked floor and broken server racks leaned precariously. The cables snaked along the walls, their ends dangling like tendrils seeking connection. Joran knelt, dipping his fingers into the cold water to touch a pulse running through the main line. Sparks of code flickered across his interface, and for a brief moment he felt a presence, not human, not machine, but something that had watched the city die and waited for a listener. He realized the network was not merely communicating, It was guiding. It had preserved fragments of people, events, and knowledge, and coding them into its cables as though the city itself had chosen to survive through memory. Every whisper was a test, each signal a riddle. Joran had to decide, follow blindly and risk losing himself to the city's ghost, or retreat and leave the hidden intelligence to fade into silence. A sudden surge of static knocked his interface offline, the voice disappearing into fractured echoes. The darkness pressed in, heavier than the damp air, and Joran's breath came in shallow gasps. He felt the cables vibrating beneath him, insistent, alive, demanding he continue. Hesitation was impossible. The city's memory would not wait for those afraid to touch its veins. He patched the terminal back online, aligning the pulses, following the coordinates embedded in the hum. Names and events flickered past in a torrent of half-formed memory. The rain outside softened, the neon from distant buildings reflecting on the water like a fractured mirror. Each reflection felt like a question. Who speaks through the cables, and why had they chosen him? Joran felt a new urgency rise in him, the sense that time was not measured in minutes or hours, but in the stability of the signals he followed. He could feel the city's pulse in the wires, the lifeblood of memories, echoes, and fragments coalescing into a rhythm that demanded recognition. The whisper was no longer passive, it was a summons, an insistence that he complete the connection. With the terminal stabilized, he traced the final sequence, connecting the last of the damaged lines. A flood of fragmented voices filled his interface. Stories long buried, warnings never delivered, confessions unsent. Joran realized that listening alone was not enough. He had to act, to understand, to preserve the whispers in a world that had forgotten them. He paused, staring at the flickering readouts, knowing the next step would define whether he became merely a witness or a participant. The city's memory waited for his choice. The hum in the cables had grown insistent, no longer a whisper, but a chorus of fragmented voices layered over one another. Joran's hands flew across his interface, connecting terminals, patching corrupted lines, and tracing pulses back to the heart of the ruined hub. Each flicker of data carried a fragment of memory, someone's life half remembered, their hopes and fears trapped in code. It was mesmerizing, intoxicating, but also dangerous. The more he listened, the more the voices pressed against the edges of his mind, each echo threatening to pull him into their world. A name surfaced repeatedly: Kalen. It belonged to someone alive before the Great Shutdown, someone who had vanished when the networks died. The whispers painted him both as a savior and a traitor, his story scattered across fractured signals. Joran's fingers hesitated. Following this trail might uncover truths better left buried, but he could not resist. Every pulse of the cables seemed to demand his attention, guiding him toward the past that the city itself had preserved. He wandered deeper into the hub, past toppled server racks and puddles reflecting distorted neon. The walls, lined with exposed conduits, vibrated with the chorus, the rhythm almost human. It was as if the city itself had a will, and it had chosen him as its witness. Each fragment of memory he pieced together tugged at him emotionally, forcing him to confront the blurred boundary between his own experiences and those stored in the cables. Faces he didn't know, voices he hadn't heard, blended with his own recollections until he felt unmoored. Suddenly, a warning pulse surged through the network, sending sparks across his interface. Joran stumbled back, heart racing. The voices shifted, aggressive now, fragmented commands and cries intertwining. Someone or something was monitoring him, testing his resolve, forcing him to prove his worth. He realized the whispers were not just memories, they were protective, alive in a way that demanded respect. The city was not silent. It had survived in shadows, and now it was judging him. Joran paused, hands hovering over the terminal. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity pushed him forward. He recalled the stories whispered among surviving technicians. Those who listened too closely often vanished, swallowed by the very intelligence they sought to understand. Yet he could not stop now. The network had chosen him as its witness, and retreat would mean leaving its message incomplete, erasing the voices trapped in the cables forever. A fragment of memory appeared. A child, laughing, running through corridors now flooded and broken. Joran blinked, stunned at the clarity. The network was showing him something personal, something meant to evoke empathy, to draw him deeper into its web. He understood then that the city's memory was not neutral. It was sentient, protective, and selective. Only someone willing to confront the weight of others' lives could carry its message forward. The hum shifted again, slower now, deliberate, pulling him toward a collapsed section of the hub. A thick cable coated in grime and water pulsed with a rhythm unlike the others. Joran traced it carefully, connecting his interface and feeling the surge of data ripple through his consciousness. The whispers became clearer, almost coherent, as if the city itself was speaking through him. Names, locations, events, all fragments of a world erased by the shutdown, coalesced into a story that demanded understanding. And then the moral choice hit him. The network offered knowledge, yes, but at a cost. Each memory he absorbed threatened to erode his sense of self, to replace his own history with fragments of others. Could he preserve the city's past without losing his present? Was the pursuit of forgotten truths worth the risk of becoming just another ghost in the wires? Joran's pulse quickened. He realized the city was not only alive, it was asking him to decide what mattered more, the memory of the world or the survival of the self. He swallowed hard, fingers hovering over the keys. The cables thrummed in anticipation, waiting for him to act, to commit to a path that might forever change him. Beyond the hub, the rain continued to fall, masking the sounds of the city's surface, while beneath the concrete and metal, the whispers persisted, patient and insistent. Joran felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. The network had chosen him, and he would have to choose. The hum continued, steady and alive, as if the city itself held its breath. Joran knew he was standing at the edge of understanding, balancing on a knife's edge between revelation and self-erasure. One choice could illuminate the forgotten past, the other could preserve his fragile present. Either way, the whispers would not let him go. Joran stood at the center of the ruined communication hub, drenched from the rain that had seeped in through fractured walls, hands trembling over his interface. The hum of the cables now filled the space, not softly but insistently, surrounding him with layers of memory, half-truths, and warnings. The network was alive in its own way, sentient and patient, offering him glimpses of the city's lost past and the lives it had claimed. Yet the deeper he listened, the more he felt a creeping unease, the realization that the knowledge it offered came at a cost, one measured in fragments of his own mind. The whispers intensified, voices overlapping in dissonant harmony. Faces appeared in his interface, Men and women long forgotten, children whose laughter had been trapped in corroded circuits, operators who had vanished when the Great Shutdown struck. Their stories pressed against his consciousness, demanding acknowledgement, seeking resolution. He tried to sort the signals, to isolate the human from the machine, but the lines blurred. Every pulse carried both truth and danger, memory and deception. Joran understood then that the network did not merely store the past, it reshaped anyone who dared listen too closely. A sudden surge of energy shot through the main cable, jolting Joran backward. Sparks danced across the waterlogged floor, illuminating fragments of neon reflected in puddles. The voice had changed. It was no longer a whisper, but a command, insistent and unyielding. Remember, act, choose. Joran felt the weight of those words press on him, the city itself demanding a decision. He could preserve the memories, risk losing himself in the process, or he could sever the connection, leaving the voices trapped in the cables for eternity. Neither choice offered comfort, neither escape. He focused on a fragment that had appeared repeatedly, Kalen. The network presented him with the man's last known movements, choices, and regrets. Joran traced the paths through collapsed streets and flooded subways, feeling Kalen's decisions echo in his own heartbeat. It was almost as if the network wanted him to finish what Kalen had begun, to carry forward knowledge and memory that might otherwise be lost. But to do so meant surrendering parts of his identity, allowing the city's whispers to overwrite his own recollections, to fold him into the ghost of the network itself. The rain pattered harder against the roof, and the hub's shadows seemed to stretch and flicker, mirroring the chaos of information streaming across his interface. Joran felt the pull of obsession, the seduction of answers hidden within corrupted code. He imagined the city alive beneath his feet, veins of memory flowing through cracked concrete and rusted metal, eyes unseen watching him, guiding him. A shiver ran down his spine. Listening further might grant insight, but it could also erase the man who stood there, alone and fragile. He thought of his own past, a faint flicker of a life before the shutdown, before the silence. Family, laughter, small joys. Each memory fragile, a candle struggling against wind. Could he allow them to be consumed, replaced by the chorus of the city's lost voices? Or could he leave the network to rot, trapped in cables, forever echoing unanswered pleas and unfulfilled lives? The decision was not moral or convenient. It was survival and self-preservation intertwined with duty and curiosity. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time had lost meaning in the hum of the cables. Joran began transferring fragments of memory into a secure interface he had prepared, isolating what he could from the invasive pulse of the network. Each successful capture brought clarity and relief, yet a part of him felt diminished, as though the voices he saved had borrowed pieces of his own consciousness. The network pulsed around him like a living organism, patient but hungry, aware of every hesitation, every choice, every fear. At last he paused, letting the hum settle. The cables thrummed faintly, almost reverently, as if acknowledging his compromise. He had preserved fragments of the city's memory, rescued Kalen's story, and yet retained himself, though not unchanged. He felt the subtle weight of the network lingering in his mind, a reminder that listening had altered him irrevocably. He could never be the same technician who had entered this hub. The city had inscribed itself into his consciousness, leaving behind a resonance that would follow him forever. Stepping back, Joran looked around the hub. shadows flickering across walls lined with corroded conduits. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles to mirror the fractured neon outside. The city's whispers were now faint, subdued, as if satisfied for the moment, yet patient, waiting for the next listener, the next choice. He knew the network would endure, silently watching, preserving, reshaping those who dared approach. He unplugged his interface and let the cables rest, silent but alive. Joran felt the weight of responsibility settle into his chest, heavy yet purposeful. Beyond the hub, the streets awaited, fractured and luminous under distant neon, carrying echoes of lives erased but never truly gone. He took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the city still thrumming faintly through his own heartbeat. And then he stepped forward, leaving the hub behind, carrying pieces of the network and the city's memory with him. Aware that every step into the world outside was now intertwined with whispers no one else could hear. The choice had been made. The path forward was uncertain. But Joran understood one truth. The city lived in its cables, and he had become its reluctant guardian.